ich głosy i oni są najważniejsi w tych.
Szanowni Państwo, spotykamy się dziś przed bramą wjazdową do Birkenau. Przed nami stoi wagon symbolizujący cierpienie wszystkich ofiar obozu koncentracyjnego i ośrodka śmierci Auschwitz, a w szczególności dramat żydowskich transportów z Węgier z 1944 roku, apogeum funkcjonowania tego strasznego miejsca. Został on postawiony 15 lat temu jako symbol na tejże rampie, dzięki wsparciu Franka Lowiego. Niech milczącą pustkę tego wagonu wypełni nasza żywa pamięć o wszystkich ofiarach Auschwitz. Na dzisiejszych obchodach pragnę powitać ocalałych. Witam głowy koronowane, prezydentów, premierów i wszystkich przewodniczących delegacji państwowych. Witam przedstawicieli Parlamentu Polskiego oraz parlamentarzystów z Europy i świata. Witam przedstawicieli korpusu dyplomatycznego. Witam darczyńców, którzy wsparli Fundusz Wieczysty Fundacji Auschwitz-Birkenau, filary pamięci. Witam przedstawicieli kościołów i wspólnot religijnych, w tym wspólnot i gmin żydowskich, a także społeczności romskiej. Witam przedstawicieli władz regionalnych i samorządowych. Witam wszystkich przedstawicieli instytucji i organizacji oraz wszystkie osoby, które przybyły na dzisiejsze obchody. O słowa powitania w imieniu ocalałych proszę Mariana Turskiego, ocalałego z Auschwitz, członka Międzynarodowej Rady Oświęcimskiej.
W imieniu wszystkich ocalałych witam dostojnych gości. Witam wszystkich zgromadzonych w tym namiocie. Witam słuchaczy i widzów środków masowego przekazu. Ale przede wszystkim najgorętsze myśli i uczucia mam dla Was, moi towarzyszki i moi towarzysze niedoli, więźniarki i więźniowie. Dziś obchodzimy Międzynarodowy Dzień Pamięci o ofiarach Holokaustu. International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Jest rzeczą zrozumiałą, nawet oczywistą, że ludzie, że media do nas się zwracają, do tych, którzy ocaleli, abyśmy podzielili się z nimi wspomnieniami. Ale nas była zawsze maleńka mniejszość. Nas, którzy przeszliśmy w swoim czasie pozytywne selekcje, już było bardzo, bardzo niewielu. A tych, którzy doczekali wolności, już prawie zupełnie niewiele. A teraz została tylko garstka. Dlatego sądzę, że nasze myśli, powinniśmy skierować ku olbrzymiej większości, ku tym milionom ofiar, które nigdy nam nie powiedzą, co przeżywały, co czuły, ponieważ pochłonęła je zagłada. Zachował się wszakże pewien dokument. Wiersz, który w jakimś stopniu coś tam mówi nam o tych właśnie ludziach. Jest to, zapamiętajcie Państwo nazwisko, Henryka Łazowert. Henryka Łazowert. Była polską poetką. Miała nawet bardzo udane próby literackie. Miała możliwość ukrycia się poza murami, ale nie chciała zostawić matki. Kiedy dzisiaj słucham, wydaje mi się, jakby to było coś pozasezonowego, zupełnie poza sezonami. Jest to dokument. Mamy jej zdjęcie. Była urodziwą kobietą. Miała lat 33. była już uznaną poetką polską. Pisała po polsku, ale jako Żydówka skazana została na zagładę. Miała szansę ukrycia się po tak zwanej aryjskiej stronie, ale nie chciała opuścić matki. Napisała list, wiersz do swojego przyjaciela. Zacytuję ten list. Odjeżdżam gdzieś tam, bardzo daleko, do stacji nieznajomej, której nie ma na żadnej mapie. Nad dworcem niebo wisi jak wielkie czarne wieko. Lokomotywa krzyczy głosem bitego człowieka. Kolejarze mają twarze jak papier. Mam z sobą tylko jedną walizkę i jeden żal, którego nikt nie próbował zgłębić. Jestem bardzo spokojna i to, czego nie widać, bardzo smutna. Bądź zdrów, mój daleki. Są serca, gdzie nic się nie zmienia. Mnie już nie ma. Nie ma. Poproszę obecnych o powstanie i minutę milczenia. Dziękuję. Dziękuję. Drodzy przyjaciele, od co najmniej 2000 lat naszej cywilizacji towarzyszy wizja apokalipsy. Oto pojawiają się 4 jeźdźcy apokalipsy. Wojna, zaraza, głód i śmierć. Ludzie są porażeni strachem, sparaliżowani tym strachem. Czują się całkowicie bezradni. Co robić? Chciałbym tutaj zacytować pieśń, którą na pewno wielu z was rozpoznałoby, gdybym ją zanucił. Nie ma obawy, nie będę śpiewał, ale chcę zwrócić uwagę na tekst niesłychanie inspirujący, tekst, który którego autorem jest rabi Nachman z Bratysławia, ale znany bardziej jako rabi Nachman z Humania, ponieważ tam kazał się pochować między grobami ofiar pogromu. Kol ha'ulam kulo, cały nasz świat, nasz świat. Gesher car מאוד jest niczym bardzo wąski pomost. Wyhaikar, a co najważniejsze, lo lefachet klal, nie bać się wcale. A więc nie bać się. Widzimy w świecie współczesnym dzisiaj, teraz wielki wzrost antysemityzmu. A to przecież właśnie antysemityzm doprowadził do Holokaustu. Deborah Lipstadt nazwała to tsunami antysemityzmu, a to właśnie jej odwaga, jej uporczywość i wytrwałość w walce z zaprzeczaniem Holokaustu, czyli denial of the Holocaust, zakończyła się sukcesem po wygranym w Londynie procesie z Davidem Irvingiem. Nie bójmy się wykazać.
When Hamas attempts at denial of the massacre of the 7th of October, let us not oppose the conspiration theories saying that all the evil of this world results from a plot started by some indefinite social groups, and Jews are often mentioned as one of such. Let us not fear discussing the problems that torment the so-called last generation. These young people may disturb our social order, they may disturb our system of truth, yet whether the judge has pronounced the sentence when he uttered those memorable words, perhaps today I sentence tomorrow's heroes. Let us not be afraid to convince ourselves that we can solve problems between neighbors, because for centuries, on many continents, many nations, many peoples, and many ethnic groups have lived and have had their homes among one another and between one another all the hatred, all the hate speech led to armed conflicts between those neighboring peoples and ethnic groups. That always ended in bloodshed. Yet, luckily, there are the positive experiences as well, when both the sides reach a conclusion that they have no other way of ensuring a peaceful, safe and secure life for their children, grandchildren, and for the future generations than leading to a compromise. Let me quote here two examples from Europe: Germans and the French, Poles and Lithuanians. Let me reiterate, let us not fear convincing ourselves that one needs to have a vision not only of what is here today, but also what is going to come tomorrow and what will come in several decades. Thank you for your attention.
Teraz wysłuchajmy głosu świadków. O zabranie głosu proszę ocalałą z obozu Auschwitz, panią Janinę Iwańską.
Ladies and gentlemen, half a year ago, in June, I was here to commemorate the first transport of inmates to Auschwitz. These were Polish inmates that had been moved here from Dartmouth. 728 people altogether. This was the 84th anniversary of the first transport. This is the 80th anniversary of the camp liberation, when the camp stopped its operation. 4.5 years, this is how the camp operated. Now, this camp changed significantly. Originally, it was a camp for political prisoners, people who were not happy with German occupation. These were mostly Poles, mostly adults. Then, Poles were no longer allowed to form associations, including scouting. This is when younger people, boys, would be moved here, teenage boys, for their activity in the scouting, Polish scouting movement. So, for a time, most of the inmates were Poles here. Then, this camp turned into a camp for Soviet POWs. Tens of thousands of POWs were moved here. But these were not, or rather this camp became a labor camp. So firstly, in August, those Russians and Poles would become subjects. They were used to test various killing gases to see which gas would be the most efficient. Then in September 1941, those Soviet POWs that survived were moved to Brzezinka, the village of Brzezinka. This is where we are, and this is where, when then started building the Birkenau camp. And they worked throughout a very heavy winter. Remember, winters here were truly tragic. Lots of poverty, lots of very hard work, and little to eat. If you disliked anything, you would be killed. March 1942, this is when the camp was commissioned. 12,000 survivors were moved here, but only 500 survived. Once Birkenau was ready, women would be brought in, because until that point there had been no women. Women from Poland and from all over Europe. Belgians, French, Czech, Romanian women, and most of them were Polish. Now, the operators of the camp, which gas worked the best, which is when they started building gas chambers. In autumn, they started the construction of the gas chambers and the crematoria. April next year, the crematoria were ready, so were the gas chambers. And that is when it was no longer a POW camp, a Soviet camp. This is when the killing machine started its operation. This is when the killing factory started its operation. All they would do here would be killing people. Some people would be moved to other camps, but most would be exterminated. It is difficult to calculate all the people killed here. Most would be registered, marked, but many a time inmates, people would be brought in here from other countries, and they would be driven directly to gas chambers and crematoria. It is calculated that around 1 million Jews were murdered this way, so they would be taken directly from the ramp to the gas chambers. Nobody knows exactly how many people died here. Now, the year was 1943. Apart from Jews and Aryan people from all over Europe and other continents, including Asia and North America, they would bring in Roma. They called it the Gypsy camp. Roma and Sinti would be put there. They called it the family camp. Families would be brought in here, Roma with their wives and children. Dr. Mengele would take care of them. Even before the war, Mengele actually had conducted experiments aimed at proving that the German race was superior. All the others were inferior, and the Jews and the Roma were basically inhuman, so they should be exterminated. The Roma were brought in here in whole families because he specialized in conducting experiments on children. Where you had a family, there were also children then, and they, or rather then, he would experiment on newborns, on babies. Many Roma died here because of diseases, misery. Now, in August 1943, there were as many as 4,000 Roman Sinti living there. There was this night of the 3rd. They were all taken directly to gas chambers. In the morning, on the next day, not a single living Roma or Sinti was there, because Mengele had completed his experiments and he no longer needed the material to work on. So it was August 1944, close to the end of the war. That is when the uprising broke out on the 1st of August. It was an uprising against the Germans. The Germans were to leave the city because the Soviets, the Russians, were on the other side of on the other bank of the river. Poles rose because they wanted to win the capital, but the Germans would return and started destroying the capital. They were given orders to flatten the city. All the inhabitants of the city were to be exterminated. In the first 6 days, in the district of Wola, 50,000 civilians were killed. They would be dragged out of their homes and flats and shot on the street. Their houses would be set on fire. I lived in the very same neighborhood, so a bit later they would be there too. A special camp was set up close to Warsaw. The houses would be set on fire. People would be brought to this camp in Pruszków, a temporary camp, and segregation would take place there. Those who couldn't work would be taken first to Germany for forced labor, and then they would be moved to concentration camps. August the 12th, this is when I was transported here to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Tens of thousands of Varsovians were moved here. Many women were moved to Ravensbrück and men to Buchenwald and other camps in Germany. Also here. So what are we celebrating today? We are celebrating the liberation. This is when the camp stopped its operation. When it happened, there were few inmates. The Germans were truly perfidious. You could hear the shots of approaching frontline, and yet they decided to take the inmates out of the camp and move them elsewhere. So those that had stayed were the sick, the young, pregnant women. So when the camp was liberated, basically only 5 to 10% of inmates were liberated. 100,000 inmates were taken out of here. They were forced on the death march to Wodzisław Śląski and then to other camps. Ravensbrück and one more camp were my stopovers, so I was liberated truly later. People use this expression, prison or concentration camp. It seems innocuous. People were kept there, but the thing is, this camp had been undergoing a number of metamorphoses until it moved into a killing site. I would like to read a quote to you. The war finished in 1945. People all over the world were in euphoria. Never again was the slogan. People believed that the war would never happen again. Picasso painted this dove of peace, and yet there were people who made certain predictions. They predicted that it is impossible for these things never to happen again, because people became so inhuman that it might happen again. In 1950, a Polish writer and essayist wrote something about the war. Now, he wrote a lot about the war and war in general. He published these articles, these columns, and let me read out to you his words. He wrote the following: if Europe, ravaged by these follies, is to avoid destruction, its people must learn to anticipate better the consequences of their actions. They must not disregard those who possess such foresight. For the older generation, this may be of lesser concern. My thoughts are with the young, those who have their lives ahead of them. War and chaos can erupt anywhere, leaving no place or reason to flee. Thank you very much.
Szanowni Państwo, o zabranie głosu proszę ocalałą z obozu Auschwitz, panią Towę Friedman.
Hi. January 27th. My whole life, since I was a little girl, I thought of it as my birthday. This is my birthday, January 27th. I celebrate it every single year. In fact, today I got all kinds of emails. Some of my friends don't even know that I have a regular birthday, because this is what counts. Never did I imagine that I would celebrate this year with such a fabulous audience, so many people, such important people. And it's an honor. It's an honor to be there. It's an honor to address you. And I want to thank you to listen to me, because I represent the children. There are very few of us are left. From my town, 4 children survived. So I'm here to talk about those who aren't here. And I'm very honored to speak to this kind of audience that has come from all over the world to mourn, remember, and honor the memory of our people who were so brutally murdered by the Nazis. However, we are also here to proclaim and to pledge that we will never, never, ever allow history to repeat itself. I would like to share some of my memories, because I know that there are many survivors here who are struggling with their own. I was just 6.5 years old when I was liberated from Auschwitz. But my memories are very vivid, thanks to my mother, who constantly validated the events to me as they were happening. When she was with me, she never, ever covered anything up. I remember, as a 5.5-year-old child, watching from my hiding place in Starchowitz labor camp, as all my little friends were rounded up and driven to their deaths, while the heartbreaking cries of their parents fell on deaf ears. After all the children were gone and the courtyard was empty, I thought to myself, am I the only Jewish child left in the world? Shortly thereafter, we were loaded into cattle cars. The men and women were separated. This was the very first time I ever saw my father cry. Up until then, no matter what horrors, no matter what happened to us, we were together. the three of us. We were a family. But now he was sent to Dachau, and my mother and I here to this camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau. Hot, hungry, thirsty, and very terrified, I held on tightly to my mother's hand in the dark cattle car for countless hours, while the cries and the prayers of so many desperate women permeated my soul and haunt me to this day. Finally, we arrived at Auschwitz, a gloomy Sunday with a sky obscured by smoke and a terrible stink hung in the air. And there were rows and rows of naked women all around me. What are they looking for? I asked my mother as I too was naked. And I tried to avoid the gleam of the German shepherd's teeth and their eyes. I was their height, so I can see them completely. I can still see their eyes to this day. My mother answered me, diseases. But if we are ill, she didn't have to finish. She pointed to the smoke right by the entrance. I knew at 5.5 what that meant. We all knew. As I was being beaten mercilessly by a guard for fidgeting, for not being able to stand still for hours at an appel, a roll call, I looked into my mother's eyes. She was standing next to me, silently, and she was pleading with me, don't cry, hold on. And I didn't. I recall thinking, I will never let them know how much they are hurting me. At 5.5, I had the rebellion in me. I will not show them. I will not let them know the pain they're inflicting on me. I am sure that many of you here who are Holocaust survivors have their own memories, and you remember when your entire being rebelled, but you felt powerless, abandoned, so you just had to resign. On an icy, windy day, I stood and watched helplessly as little girls from the nearby barrack were marched away, crying and shivering, to the gas chamber. They were covered with rags, and some of them didn't even have any shoes and were walking barefoot in the snow. They were very young, as I was, 6 or 7, but starvation shrunk their bodies, and they appeared even younger. They too became ashes. Is my barrack next? I silently wondered. I thought that we all have to die, that it was normal. If you're a Jewish child, you have to die. I wasn't even sure what Jewish was. because I never saw any celebrations. But death, child, Jewish, seemed a normal thought. I knew nothing about partisans saving Jews from ghettos and camps. I knew nothing about the 1944 Warsaw Uprising, nor of the Allies and the D-Day, nor of the invasion of Normandy. At that time, we were victims in a moral vacuum. But today, however, we have an obligation, not only to remember, which is very, very important, but also to warn and to teach that hatred only begets more hatred, killing more killing. Instead, our revenge has been to build a strong Jewish country and raise our families in peace. Many of you here, I saw, have your wonderful families with you, just as I do. 80 years after liberation, the world is again in crisis. Our Jewish Christian values have been overshadowed worldwide by prejudice, fear, suspicion, and extremism. And the rampant anti-Semitism that is spreading among the nations is shocking. It's shocking to all of us, to our children and our grandchildren. Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East, is fighting for its very existence and its way of life. We mourn not only the fallen soldiers and the hostages, but also the turbulence and mistrust in our society. We pray for strength, resilience, and of course, hope, which has to be part of our daily life. We all of us, must reawaken our collective conscience to transform this violence, anger, hatred, and malignancy that has so powerfully gripped our society into a humane and just world before these terrible, terrible negative forces will destroy us all. It is an enormous task, but our Jewish sages teach us the time is short, the task is great. We may not be able to complete it, but we have an obligation to start. Thank you.
O zabranie głosu proszę ocalałego z obozu Auschwitz, pana Leona Weintrauba.
Drodzy i bardzo mi bliscy, ocaleni z tego nazistowskiego obozu koncentracyjnego, wielce szanowni przedstawiciele władz państwowych, organizacji oraz wyznań, drodzy goście z bliska i daleka. Urodziłem się w Łodzi 1 stycznia roku 1926. Mam więc teraz lat 99. Po śmierci ojca, kiedy miałem 1,5 roku, w roku 1927, moja matka spieniężyła wszystko, co tylko mogła. Otworzyła małą pralnię w Łodzi przy ulicy Kamiennej 2, obecnie Włókienicza. I w 2 małych pomieszczeniach żyliśmy, matka z 5 dzieci. To był warsztat pracy i miejsce dla całej rodziny.
Primary school, and I was a good student. So after the 6th grade, I got admitted free of charge to a Pilsudski gymnasium at Sienkiewicza Street in Łódź. And I was about to start my further education on the 1st of September 1939. Now, the invasion of our country by the Nazi army disrupted these plans. And in the winter of 1940, we were forcibly moved to the ghetto Litzmannstadt that the Nazi established. While in the ghetto, I worked in the Metal 1 department, and I spent them there almost 5 years. 5 years of hard labor and constant hunger. In August 1944, the liquidation of the ghetto began, and we were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. My mother and her sister, my auntie Eve, were murdered on the same day in the gas chamber, and then they were burned in the crematorium. And then we were stripped of all our humanity. First, we were stripped naked and robbed of all our personal belongings. Then they brutally shaved all our hair, quite often with painful skill removal, which was so painful when carbolic fluid was used to disinfect. And then we were dressed in rags. Trousers, shirts, jackets. And then clogs, wooden clogs. This is how we were reduced to mere disposable items. I suffered a lot. I felt utterly alone. I was so brutally separated from my family. I also suffered because of this constant black smoke, reeking of burnt flesh that was rising from the chimneys. This was particularly maddening. After a few weeks, I managed to sneak out illegally of Auschwitz-Birkenau, unnoticed by the capos and SS men. I joined a group of prisoners who were selected to work outside of the camp. In Dönau, which was the sub-camp of Gross Rosen, I worked as an electrician. In late February 1945, after a 3-day death march we were transported to the Flossenburg camp, and then a month later to the Natzweiler Stutthof Offenburg camp. I was liberated by the French troops near Donaueschingen on the 20th of April 1945. As I was diagnosed with general debility, and I only weighed 35 kilos. I was also diagnosed with typhus. I had to be hospitalized for several weeks, first in Donaueschingen, and then I was stationed at the French military sanitarium on the Reichenau Peninsula. In the autumn of 1946, I started my medical studies in Göttingen. I returned to Poland in November 1950, and after graduation in 1954, I worked at the Clinic of Obstetrics and Women's Diseases of the Medical Academy in Warsaw. But owing to rising anti-Semitism in Poland, I lost my job in February 1969, where I was the head of the obstetrics and gynecology department in Otwock Hospital. So in September 1969, I emigrated to neutral Sweden together with my family. Today, we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz camp. This Nazi concentration camp symbolizes the unprecedented cruelty in the treatment of people throughout history. This is a place where the techniques of mass and industrial murder were first introduced. It grieves me deeply to see in many European countries, but also in Poland, Nazi-style uniforms and slogans openly paraded at marches. It grieves me to see that this is happening without any consequences. These people self-proclaim themselves as national champions, but at the same time, they proclaim the hateful ideology of German Nazis. This is the ideology that murdered millions who were considered subhuman under the sign of the swastika. So this ideology, an attitude that preaches hostility and hatred towards others, this defines racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia as virtues. And this is occurring here in our country, which has suffered so much, which has endured extensive damage under the Nazi occupation. I urge all people of goodwill, and especially I ask of the young people, be sensitive to all expressions of intolerance and resentment towards those who are different, regardless of their skin color, religion, or sexual orientation. In today's digital world, it is so incredibly challenging to distinguish between genuine intention and the pursuit of popularity, the need to exist that stems from a conscious and persistent agenda. I repeat, therefore, be attentive and be vigilant. We, the survivors, we understand that the consequence of being considered different is active persecution, the effects of which we have personally experienced. And we did experience it very hard. So let us be very serious, and let's take seriously what the enemies of democracy preach. They generally seek to implement the slogans they promote. If they succeed in gaining power, we must avoid the mistake of the 1930s, when the world failed to take seriously the Nazi regimes and the plans to create a state free of Jews, Roma, and people of different opinions, or sick, or those deemed unfit to live, were underestimated. Therefore, I implore everybody to intensify their efforts in countering the views that led to the genocide we are commemorating today. Modern understanding of our heritage and our DNA confirms that there is but only one race of humans, Homo sapiens. Therefore, the theory of racism, which is a fundamental principle of Nazi ideology, is false and incompatible with reality. Let me assure you, as a doctor, as a gynecologist, when I perform operations, whatever the patient's skin, the tissues beneath are identical in every person. Astronomers tell us that there are trillions of solar systems and galaxies, and that are similar to ours. Our planet is merely a speck in the vast cosmos. Isn't it absurd to divide the inhabitants of the speck into thousands of disparate groups that are often and sadly hostile to each other? Every year there are lengthy discussions taking place in parliaments regarding budget cuts. Significant amounts are, however, allocated to armaments. In contrast, the peaceful coexistence of nations could be achieved without any financial cost. Just think about the positive impact this expenditure could create. I wish to express my gratitude and appreciation to the management and all the staff of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum for their tireless efforts in preserving the memory of the victims of the Nazi ideology and for combating prejudice and hostility toward others. Well, allowing the memory of millions of innocent victims to fade would be equivalent to robbing them of their lives for a second time. The commemoration of the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz serves as a reminder of the inhumane treatment of individuals, but also it is a warning against the increasingly vocal movements of the radical and anti-democratic right. I kindly ask everyone now to stand and observe with a moment of silence the memory of the victims of the degenerate German nationalism. Thank you.
O zabranie głosu proszę przedstawiciela filarów pamięci.
Of Pillars of Remembrance, the largest private donors of the Fund for Retaining Authenticism of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Mr. Ronald S. Lauder.
"50 countries, royal families, and heads of state who came here today to honor the memory of those who died here. Thank you. Ten years ago, in 2015, Auschwitz survivor Roman Kent stood here on this platform at the 70th anniversary of the liberation, and he said these words: "We don't want our past to be our children's future." Let me repeat that again. We don't want our past to be our children's future. Roman Kent died 6 years later, but his words haunt us today, because if Roman Kent were here and saw what was happening to the Jewish people around the world in 2025, he would cry. It's hard for us to believe what we see today, the sudden violence of hatred against Jews, the singling out of the one Jewish state with huge demonstrations shouting anti-Semitic slurs everywhere. This is hard for us to watch, any of us, but I cannot imagine what it must be like for the almost 50 survivors here who are with us today. What Roman Kent said, and all of you lived through, we are watching right now in front of our eyes. Earlier, you heard Tova Friedman tell a story of watching children separate from their parents and taken to gas chambers. We know that 1.5 million children were killed in the Holocaust, the most heartbreaking number in an ocean of heartbreak. But 15 months ago, not 80 years ago, we saw Jewish children slaughtered, once again, for one reason: because they were born Jewish. In a very fundamental way, what happened in Israel on October 7th and what happened here at Auschwitz have one common thread: the age-old hatred of Jews. On January 27th, 1945, when the Red Army entered these gates, the world finally saw where the step-by-step progression of anti-Semitism leads. It leads right here. The gas chambers, the piles of bodies, and the horrors within these gates. But what led up to the Holocaust final outcome? It began slowly, first when Jews were singled out in universities, excluded from jobs, with boycotts and attacks in the media. Yes, it began slowly, and then it happened all at once. Throughout the 1930s, the hatred against Jews may have been ignited by Hitler in Germany and Austria, but in France, Italy, even England and the United States, there were strong forces that supported this hatred. France had Marcel Boucard, Jacques Doriot, and Francois Coty. England had Oswald Mosley. Italy had Mussolini. And the US, there was the German Bund. Henry Ford was a huge anti-Semite, as were Father Conklin, and believe it or not, even Charles Lindbergh. Today, we see eerie parallels throughout the world, throughout Europe, North America, even Australia. Jewish students have been singled out and threatened in universities. Today, Jewish professors have been fired. Today, Jewish children have been told to hide any outward signs of being Jewish. Today, there are mass demonstrations against Jews. Today, we see vile comments all over social media. Need I remind you, this is not 1933 or 1939. This is 2025. The hatred of Jews had its willing supporters then, and it has them now. You can't be Jewish or non-Jewish and not be concerned with what you see all around us today. But here, at these gates, we are forced to face one great question when we tell the story of Auschwitz. Everyone knows what happened here, but no one seems to know why it happened. Yes, it was a step-by-step process, and it was aided by those who hated Jews. But it was advanced by the indifference of people who thought they were not affected by anti-Semitism because they were not Jewish. It was the world's silence that led to Auschwitz. When Hitler heard that silence after Kristallnacht in 1938, he knew he could do anything he wanted with the Jews. Kristallnacht may have been on page 1 of some newspapers, but it quickly disappeared. World leaders said nothing. On my first visit here at Auschwitz, I was accompanied by a famous survivor, Elie Wiesel. We were walking away from the gas chambers, and the sun was setting. Elie paused for a moment, and then he said something I will never forget. You know, he said, most people think the opposite of love is hate. It's not. It's indifference. Today it's the same story. Silence, indifference, and the exception of this hatred. So today, all of us must take a pledge to never be silent when it comes to anti-Semitism, or for that matter, any other hatred. These lessons for Auschwitz are not just for Jews, they're for the entire world. That's because Jews are the canaries in the coal mine. When the canary dies, miners know they have to get out of that mine as fast as possible. That canary died 15 months ago on October 7th. And that is the most consequential warning for the entire world. Yes, yes, Hitler went after the Jews first. But when it was all over, more than 60 million human beings were dead. And this continent lay in ruins. Over 1 million Jews were killed here at Auschwitz. But they were not alone. 70,000 Polish Christians who thought they might be safe were also murdered right here, along with the others. When I spoke here 5 and 10 years ago, I talked about the horrors that Jewish survivors lived through. But I always spoke about it in the past. It never occurred to me that this could happen again. Of course, I'm not talking about gas chambers, but attacks on the Jewish people, the boycotts, the targeting, the exclusion could not be more real. And yes, they're really happening. But here is a crucial point. These attacks are not just targeting Jews. They are attacking Judeo-Christian beliefs, which is the bedrock of Western civilization. When we hear the chants like globalized intifada or death to Israel, what they are really saying is death to Western civilization. How do you stop this? Today, we have a generation that is led by social media, indoctrinated by activist teachers, and aided by a complacent population. They're complacent because they don't see it as their problem. But please believe me, it is all of our problems. Today in the US, 87% of Americans 30 and over fully support Israel's right to exist, just as every other country has exactly the same numbers. But for Americans under 30, the number drops to 40%. No right to exist? Almost half of all younger Americans don't believe Israel has a right to exist. And they are our future leaders. Let me tell you, this is not just happening in America. It is happening to young people in every single country that is represented here. Just as in my country, young people are getting most of their information from social media, and that is dangerous. Education, serious, honest education, is the only way to correct this, and that won't be easy. Entire institutions will have to be overhauled and corrected, and that goes for the media as well. Keeping opinions out of news would be a good start. So today, I cannot stand here and look at these survivors and say that everything is okay, as I have in the past, because everything is not okay. Roman Kent's words haunt us. So let today be the day we all of us, world leaders and ordinary citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish, old and young, make a solemn pledge to stop this now before it's too late. We must, you must, and that's every one of your countries. No hatred of Jewish people or any people is tolerated at all. Remember, it wasn't just Jews that died here. In fact, every single prime minister, president, king here today lost millions of their own countrymen in a war to defeat this hatred. 80 years ago, millions of young men gave up their lives so these these gas chambers were turned off forever. That means millions of young men, I should say women, never had the chance to live out their lives, to fall in love, to have families, to do good work, to watch their children grow up. They gave up everything so we would live in a free and safe world. More than 60 million human beings died, 6 million of them Jews. We will never know what the world lost in all these deaths, the cures for disease, the great works of art, music, and literature. So much is lost with each life that was extinguished. Our future, the future of the entire world, depends on which direction young people take. They have a choice to go on the old road of hatred once again, or they can summon up the courage to stand up to these hatreds swirling around them. All of us have a choice as well. We can leave here and go back to our 50 different countries and assume it's not our problem. Or we can leave here united in our determination to stop this hate rising up in our world, united in our determination to guide our young people in the right direction, united as one. I've been involved with Auschwitz for more than 50 years, since the 25th anniversary in 1970. On my first visit, I saw how time elements were taking their toll. I realized that if no efforts were made to preserve Auschwitz, it would soon disappear. So I took it upon myself to start that process, to make sure that Auschwitz would stand for all time as the strongest lesson for all humanity. What we see here today reflects what Auschwitz looked like in 1945. So future generations will see and learn the lessons of Auschwitz. And I salute the many people who helped me in this endeavor with the same commitment. I hope Roman Kent is looking at us now, knowing that we do everything in our power to make sure that his warning does not come to pass. Don't worry, Roman. We will fight this hatred with renewed determination. And I firmly believe that the good will triumph in the end. Finally, I would like to convey what this place, Auschwitz, means to me. Not as a survivor, not as a liberator, but simply as a Jew who cared deeply about my fellow Jews. On that first visit here so long ago, I was struck by a thought that every Jew must have when they come to Auschwitz. What if I'd been born in Budapest in 1944, where my grandparents came from, instead of New York, where they settled? What would have happened to me? You all know the answers to that question. I feel a deep personal connection to this place, this platform where over 1 million people arrived. I was drawn to this place. I try to come here as often as possible. Every visit, I will always stop at the train station on Avincian and buy flowers. And then I would find a rock, and I would lay the flowers at the tombstone out there. I would put the rock on top of the memorial that many of us have done for more than 1 million men, women, and children whose souls swirl around us. I would say a special prayer, the prayer you know. I felt then and I feel now. I tie to each one of them. It's hard to explain, but it's profound, and it's a major part of who I am. I've spoken here in past commemorations. Today, I must be realistic. this may well be the last commemoration, and also that I will speak at. But I leave today with the understanding I did my best, I did my utmost to be worthy of the memory of all those who were lost there. I tried my best. Hope I was worthy. God bless the memory, and God bless all of you. Thank you.
Głos oddaję panu dyrektorowi, opiekunowi miejsca.
The director, guardian of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial, Dr. Piotr Cywiński. When I was a child, I spoke like a child.
Dziecko. Myślałem jak dziecko. Kiedy
But when I became an adult, I left behind the ways of childhood, except for memory. Memory endures even from the earliest experiences of our lives. Today, we must reflect upon memory and experience. I realized this as I grew up, and most importantly, in this very place. Nowhere else have I matured more. After all, I became aware of Auschwitz thanks to you, and through you, survivors. Every generation needs a lens to evaluate its time. Today, we all stand together, looking at the world through the lens of our adulthood. We must look within ourselves and ask, what have we done with memory? Memory is polyphonic. It both divides and unites generations. It has divided and united me in my own experience too. For 18 years, I have stood here, experiencing both division and unity. We teach history, but this is not the same as teaching memory. History is the knowledge of facts. Memory is the awareness of those facts, which is precisely what we so desperately need today. History does not create trauma. Memory can. Memory is the key to understanding today's world and designing tomorrow's. Yet we continue to focus solely on teaching history, not memory. Our educational programs must be changed. They must. Because memory is not just a matter of culture. It is a matter of clarity, identity. We standing here with the people who bear responsibility for the world we live in today. Like you, I was born after the war. Like you, I don't remember those times. Like you, I listen to the stories of the survivors. But what am I doing today? And what am I neglecting? What decisions do I make today, and are they guided by memory? Memory hurts. Memory helps. Memory guides. Memory warns. Memory raises awareness. Memory obliges. Who are you without memory? Without memory, you have no history, you have no experience, and no point of reference. If you have no memory, you may not know which path to choose. And if you truly lack memory, be sure, your enemies will design one for you. And you, our dear survivors, beloved ones, you have come here. Our memory is primarily shaped by our experiences, the fruit of your lives. There are no words, dearest ones, to express the depth of our gratitude. But what are we to do with this memory today? If today, my friend, you feel uncertain about what to do, if you feel powerless, if you feel you cannot go on, then perhaps you have reached your limit. If so, know that limits are only imaginary. You can always do more. Do something good then, whatever you can, in the best way you can. Do it for others, and you will find that you have done it for yourself as well. Do it within the scope of your abilities. But do something. Act, and you will recover from feelings of helplessness and apathy. Take action. Begin. But always remember, let your memory finally come alive today. Because your memory is your pillar, your aid, your instinct, yourself.
Szanowni Państwo, oddajmy teraz hołd ofiarom Auschwitz. Zapraszam do wspólnej modlitwy za pomordowanych w obozie. Do odmówienia modlitwy Kadisz zapraszam rabinów z naczelnym rabinem Polski na czele.
למלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזורקי המסירים, לנשמות אחינו בני ישראל הקדושים והטהורים, שנפלו בידי הרוצחים, ונשפך דמם באושוויץ, טרבלינקה, מיידניק, סוביבור, בלז'ץ, חלמנו ובשאר מחנות השמדה ועבודה וגטאות באירופה, שנהרגו ושנשרפו ושנשחטו ושנקברו חייהם בכל מיתות משונות ואכזריות על קדושת השם, בעבור שאנחנו בניהם ובנותיהם, אחיהם ואחיותיהם, מתפללים על הזכרת נשמותיהם בגן עדן מנוחתם. לכן ברחמים יסרים סדר גנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצורכם ונשמותם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, ינוחה בשלום משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
שיר המעלות. ממעמקים קראתיך אדוני, אדוני שמעה וקולי, תהיינה אוזניך קשובות לכל תחנוני. אם עוונות תשמוריה, אדוני מי יעמוד? כי עמך הסליחה למען תברא. קיוויתי אדוני קיוותה נפשי, ולדברו הוחלתי. נפשי לאדוני משומרים לבוקר, שומרים לבוקר. יחל ישראל אל אדוני, כי עם אדוני החסד והרבה עמו פדות. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברך יראותי, וימליך מלכותי, ויצמח פורקני ויקרב משיחי. בחיי חון וביומכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה עם כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירם בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה משמעיה, וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
As the heart panteth after the water brooks, So panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been meet day and night, while they continually say to me, where is your God?
Moja dusza rozczula się, gdy wspominam, jak kroczyłem w tłumie, idąc do domu Bożego, wśród głosów radości i dziękczynienia świątecznego orszaku. Dlaczego się smucisz, moja duszo? Czemu się we mnie trwożysz? Zaufaj Bogu, bo jeszcze będę Go sławił. On jest moim zbawieniem i Bogiem.
Ко мне самому душа моя смятеся, всего ради помянух Тя от земли Иорданский и Ермонимский, от горы Малая. Бездна призывает ко главе, во гласе хляби Твоих, вся высоты Твоя и волны Твоя на мне пройдоша.
W dzień okazuje mi Pan swoją łaskę, a w nocy Mu śpiewam i modlę się do mojego Boga. Mówię do Boga, opoko moja, dlaczego mnie zapomniałeś? Czemu chodzę smutny? Czemu wróg mnie gnębi?
As with a sword in my bones, mine enemies reproach me, while they say daily unto me, where is thy God? Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him, who is the health of my countenance and my God.
Psalm 42. Tęsknota za Bogiem i świątynią. Odmówili reprezentujący różne grupy ofiar, przedstawiciele judaizmu, Kościoła katolickiego, Kościoła prawosławnego, kościołów protestanckich i islamu. Bardzo dziękuję wszystkim.
Very much indeed. And please be seated.
Szanowni Państwo, uprzejmie prosimy wszystkich Państwa.
May I kindly ask you all to remain seated. In a moment, the survivors and heads of national delegations will be asked to light candles at the train car. So please remain seated. Ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly ask the survivors to be the first to lay votive candles at the train car.
Szanowni Państwo, o złożenie zniczy proszę przewodniczących delegacji państwowych. Szanowni Państwo, obchody 80. rocznicy wyzwolenia niemieckiego nazistowskiego obozu koncentracyjnego i zagłady.
Concentration and extermination camp has come to a close. Thank you to the survivors for their presence, and thank you to all of you for being here with us. Thank you for your presence and for your memory. So very important memory. I would like to thank the Clarinet Quarter for providing us with the music. This quarter featured Grzegorz Tobis, Piotr Wybraniec, Waldemar Żarów and Tomasz Rzymła. May I kindly ask you for a moment of patience? Please bear with us so that the survivors and their guardians can leave the tent quietly. Once again, please remain seated and allow the survivors to leave the tent.